Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth.
Hello, you good people.
Hello.
Welcome to Life on Earth. Thank you for joining us. I'm Robert Nasir.
And I'm Amy Nasir.
And you know who you are. We are glad you are here. Life on Earth is a show about life on Earth. You know, in 1976, Ayn Rand said about her philosophy, speaking to the cadets at West Point, informally I called it objectivism, but informally I call it a philosophy for living on Earth, unquote. Now it stands to reason if that's true. If objectivism, this philosophy that we are all fans and in some case strong advocates of, really is a philosophy for living on Earth, it stands to reason that objectivists, students of Ayn Rand, should be among the happiest, the most successful, the most efficacious, the most charitable and generous, the most badass people on Earth.
The most value laden.
Value laden.
Yes.
That's right. See, I was reading the Ayn Rand Institute's New Ideal website. Great articles recently. But they also republished an old article, great article from the Objectivist Forum, this big heavy book here. We mentioned this recently because we've been pulling Leonard Peikoff essays out of here to talk to James Valiant about.
It's such a treasure trove.
One of the early articles, right after the passing of Ayn Rand, 1982, was an article by Harry Binswanger called Ayn Rand's Philosophic Achievement. Must read. Links to it are on my Facebook in the notes for this show. If you don't already know where it is, don't already have a copy of the Objectivist Forum handy. It can't be beat as content as far as understanding Ayn Rand's philosophical achievement. And he breaks it down into six elements. The primacy of existence, her theory of concepts, the theory of free will, man's life as the standard of morality, the moral basis of individual rights, and the psychoepistemology of art. Now, I can't argue with that. It's a great analysis about Ayn Rand's philosophical achievement. But what I want to talk about, and what I want you to talk to us about in the chat, God, I love the chat on this show. You guys are great. I want to talk about Ayn Rand's greatest hits. If there was a greatest hits album, Ayn Rand's greatest hits, and of course it wouldn't all be audio, although you could go to the Ford Hall Forum and other audio lectures and you could put together a greatest hits album too. But more generally, Ayn Rand as a philosophy, Ayn Rand as a writer, an author, literature, Ayn Rand's cultural achievements, what she has done for the country, for the world, what she's done for your life personally, and Ayn Rand's life story, the inspirational aspects of this woman who escaped communist Russia, came to America, became a script writer, and then an author. And we're going to share our picks. So let us know in the chat, what has Ayn Rand meant to you? What are your favorite aspects of Ayn Rand? Her greatest hits.
In the Billboard Top 10.
That's right. If you were putting together your own personal Ayn Rand mixtape, and sharing it with somebody that you've taken a shine to, what would you be passing on? I'll tell you my picks.
Yes, go for it. But before that, I think it should be noted that it doesn't have to be super philosophical or super technical philosophy.
No, and ours certainly won't.
No. Yeah.
If you want the technical philosophical greatest hits, I'm going to say it again. Harry Binswanger has made the list, and it's really incontestable. He gives you all that. I would agree with all six of them, heavy hitters. If you haven't read that article, you should. No. What I want to talk about is, again, my own Ayn Rand mixtape. First up, individualism. But not individualism as self-interest. No, what she talks about, and she certainly talks about self-interest, but when Ayn Rand talks about individualism, she talks about first-handedness. She talks about individualism as living firsthand, of thinking for yourself. You know, she says a creative man, for example, a creative man is motivated by the desire to achieve, not the desire to beat others.
Yes.
You know, that first-handed aspect, the whole theme of the Fountainhead, Our hero, Howard Rourke, he creates, he makes things happen. And that emphasis on where individualism isn't just self-interest, but first-handedness, somebody who looks not at what other people think, but at reality. But in relation to that, absolutely the virtue of selfishness. Life, your own life as the standard of value. To say I love you, you have to first be able to say the I from the fountainhead. And romantically, this virtue of selfishness doesn't mean yourself to the exclusion of others. The essence of masculinity is that personal strength. And I think the essence of femininity is an analog of that. Ayn Rand didn't tell us what the essence of femininity was.
Well, she did say hero worship, but that was sort of a relational.
It's a relational
value.
idea.
Yeah.
But as far as what it is to be an efficacious woman.
Well, just look at her.
Good point. Good point. And she did call herself the opposite of a feminist. She said, "I am a male chauvinist" during one of her Q&As.
Well, that was in the context of, if somebody asked her if she was a feminist of that age, not the kind of feminist that she would agree with, but the kind of ideas that they were going into, the kind of victimhood mentality.
I guess that's worth explaining. It's funny. I've been involved in objectivism and Ayn Rand for so long that I forget some people might take that the wrong way.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
It's contextual, folks.
But yeah, Ayn Rand was the opposite of an egalitarian in regard to the sexes.
Yes.
She did not regard men and women as the same thing or interchangeable. And I love that. You've heard us talk about race. You've heard us talk about sexuality. You've heard us talk about gender preferences, for example, straight, homosexual. And I love it all. I love that it's all out there. And I love that Ayn Rand has this perspective. She was very, very not egalitarian in that regard. The third thing I would mention after individualism and self-interest would be life as an end in itself. And this, I don't think it's talked about enough. You think individualism, you think selfishness, doesn't that kind of include life as an end in itself? But the way that that's expressed in Ayn Rand's writing, and what that means for me, what that means for you, the fact that your life is an end in itself, that you are not born in hoc, you're certainly not born with original sin, and she talks about that at length. I've quoted the Kira's Viking section of We the Living and the longer version that's in the early Ayn Rand. If you don't have a copy of the early Ayn Rand, and if you love Ayn Rand as much as I do, you have got to have a copy of this book, because it's like discovering new. You think you've read all 4 of her novels and there's nothing left to read. So much good stuff in here. But Kira's Viking, which is an outtake from We the Living. Kira's Viking is mentioned in We the Living, but the longer version of the legend Ayn Rand actually wrote out, even though it's only mentioned briefly in the story. And you can read that in the early Ayn Rand, and that sequence of this Viking, this warrior who doesn't bow to kings and doesn't bow to priests, ends with this sequence. The Viking smiled as men smile when they look up at heaven, but he was looking down. His right arm was one straight line with his lowered sword. His left arm, straight as the sword, raised a goblet of wine to the sky. The first rays of a coming sun, still unseen to the earth, struck the crystal goblet. It sparkled like a white torch. Its rays lighted the face of those below. To a life, said the Viking, which is a reason unto itself. This perspective that your life is an end in itself. You are not born in hoc. You do not have a duty to others above and beyond any that you've chosen. It's a magnificent thing. You get this also from Anthem, from chapter 11 of Anthem, which begins, I am, I think, I will. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read Anthem yet, I'm sure you all have. My hands, my spirit, my sky, my forest, this earth of mine. What must I say besides? These are the words. This is the answer. I won't go on because I've read this one before and I'm sure that I will read it again, but this perspective of life as an end in itself, you just want to laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, shall we break for a second to read
Yes.
what people are in the chat? First of all, let me say, if you have any questions or comments that you would like to kind of elevate for us on my radar as we're reading these, please consider a donation to the Ayn Rand Center UK in form of the super chat. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure that somebody out there might actually put in the membership link for Ayn Rand Center UK into the chat. And
if you're not already a member, become a member. If you're not already a super chatter, it's time to figure out how to do that on YouTube. It's so much fun when people put a few dollars on a chat and it stands out, although we are trying to read everything. So what do we got?
We've got Daniel. He talks about one of his favorite scenes in Atlas Shrugged.
Yes.
It's the mill scene, the siege of Reardon Steele's mills. And then that's when Frank Adams was there, and
Frank
he was
Adams,
shooting with two guns on each hand, a gun on each hand, and knocking down the bad guys, all the barbarians at the gate. And oh, it's so good. That's such a great scene. I love it. Yeah, that's when Francisco was hired. Somehow he got himself hired in there, and he uses the alias Frank Adams.
Mm-hmm.
And Ayn Rand's husband was named Frank. So that was an homage to him. So that was really lovely. And oh my goodness.
And he saves Reardon's life.
Yes, he saves Reardon's life.
It's a payback because earlier during one of their conversations, there was a breakout of one of the furnaces.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And
so they both worked on saving the furnace. But at one point, Francisco slips.
Mm-hmm.
And he's about to fall in a way that could have been his death. And Reardon jumps over and saves him.
Yeah, that's so great.
Francisco says, "You saved my life." Reardon says, "You saved my furnace."
So lovely. And then Paul in the chat. Yes, I'm going to use your real name. Sorry. He says, "My life will be done my way. I am not a team player." So yes. People have if you have a certain personality where you're not constantly wanting to be on a team and being a team player, you have. It's nice to be independent in that way, for sure. And then Daniel also says, "Good Copy" is such a great short story.
Good
and I
Copy
completely
is so
agree.
much fun.
Yes, I totally agree. I need to reread that real soon. Yes. So let me kind of interrupt you in your list. I'm going to go ahead and trade off here. So one of the things that I really loved that Ayn Rand introduced me to, the errors of knowledge versus breaches of morality, of knowledge versus errors of morality or evasion, and how that is so important to understand, not to accept unearned guilt. And to,
she says you must make every allowance for errors of knowledge and make no allowances for errors of morality, for breaches of morality.
Breaches of morality.
Yes.
Yes. And, breaches of morality in terms of, having a habit of being irrational or being evasive or denying reality. That's so important. And all of this stuff. I had when I was 17, and even, after that too, it took me a while to integrate the concept of values, because I was introduced to the idea of selfishness through Friedrich Nietzsche. And, his philosophy is pretty much based on emotionalism. And so I didn't quite understand how to validate my own values, so I called them desires at the time.
Sure.
And I was, Nietzsche, he was anti-sacrifice, except in the way of getting people to sacrifice for you. So he was not cool, Nietzsche. I was kind of going in that, I was kind of steering myself towards that before I found Ayn Rand. Thankfully, I found her, and thankfully she got me straight on what values were, and that they should not involve any form of sacrifice one way or the other.
Well, in that regard, I would jump to the benevolent universe premise. Mm-hmm. And steal another quote from Atlas Shrugged. "In the name of the best within you, do not sacrifice this world to those who are its worst. In the name of the values that keep you alive, do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, in those who have never achieved his title. Do not lose your knowledge that man's proper estate is an upright posture, an intransigent mind, and a step that travels unlimited roads. Do not let your fire go out, spark by irreplaceable spark, in the hopeless swamps of the approximate, the not quite, the not yet, the not at all. Do not let the hero in your soul perish in lonely frustration for the life you deserved but have never been able to reach. Check your road and the nature of your battle. The world you desired can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It's yours. This is the benevolent universe premise. And what I know people who read this and say, oh, do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless. And they get so hung up on the negative that they don't realize what Ayn Rand is saying is, well, as she has Dagny say later in the book, we never had to take any of it seriously, did we? The ugly, the distorted, that needs to be fought. But Amy, as you once said, you need to step over it, not in it.
Yeah, don't step in it, step over it.
But this is the benevolent universe premise, not that the universe is out to make you happy. It's not, it's just there. But that's all you need, is for the universe to be there. The benevolent universe premise says success is possible. And more than that, success is what matters. And all that ugliness, we never had to take it seriously, did we? In fact, in that category of inspiration, I'm tempted to read the opening of part 4, what a lot of people just call, oh, the boy on the bicycle. But everybody knows that one. So I'll go back to Atlas Shrugged, the opening of the John Galt line.
Yeah, this is good.
And this is the narrative. She looked at the crowd and she felt simultaneously astonishment that they should stare at her when this event was so personally her own that no communication about it was possible, and a sense of fitness that they should be here, that they should want to see it, because the sight of an achievement was the greatest gift a human being could offer to others. That one's often quoted. The sight of an achievement is the greatest gift a human being can offer to others.
It's so good. And it's so true.
It is.
It's so true.
It's so good that it's often quoted, out of context and with the tense changed. Kind of like people who will quote, the question isn't who's going to let me, the question is who will stop me, which was never said in The Fountainhead.
Right.
But it's a great sequence. It's an important sequence in The Fountainhead. And there's a whole essay on the Ayn Rand Institute website about that I strongly encourage you to read, because it does a great job examining that quote. And I know you want to say something here, but I really need to make this point because it's super important. If I can find it in my notes here. Oh, maybe I can't find it in my notes. The point is that even though that quote is always quoted wrong, the meaning of that scene is what people are trying to convey by rewriting it. Because in the book, it's harder to use as a pithy quote in a meme. Go ahead with what you were going to say, and I'll find it real quick.
Oh, I was just going to say, with regard to the side of achievement is the greatest gift you can give to somebody else.
Yes.
It's such a great one. And it really, I have never read any other words by any other human being throughout history that so distills and essentializes the exponential growing or the exponential value of human values, and how values play off with, amongst one another in terms of, people getting together and, having that mutual, admiration society kind of effect, that love fest sort of effect. And I've certainly experienced that, when you find people who you really admire and you can articulate to them exactly why you admire them, and that articulation, that understanding in your own mind, that integration of what their virtues are, is going to help you with your life and actually bring you a better understanding about your life in the universe and your efficaciousness and what you want out of life.
Yes, we did a whole episode called Compliments. And you especially cashed in on that.
Yes.
Some people think Ayn Rand is all about being cold and solitary. And some people even take that from this book, The Fountainhead, which is bizarre. The book opens with the words, Howard Rourke laughed.
Yeah.
And that's really a theme throughout the book, which, it's very kind of bizarre to, not just the movie adaptation, but hearing about the play that was done in New York of this angry, cold, cynical, and it's the exact opposite of what Howard Rourke is.
Reread The Fountainhead and just keep that question in your mind. What is Howard Rourke feeling? And what are his intentions here? And why is he motivated to, for instance, help Peter Keating, during the times when he helped him? What was his motivation for these kinds of actions that he took?
Yes.
And you'll find that he's actually such an easygoing, just lovely person. Well, he's not an angry stoic.
Yes, despite being not social in the usual sense.
Not the usual sense.
He is enormously passionate and enormously comfortable with himself. He likes himself.
Yeah.
Think of the scene between Gil Winan and Howard Rourke, where Gil Winan is talking about his past, and he ends with, I haven't always liked being Gil Winan. And then a little bit after that, he says, I'm going to break my own rule and ask you a personal question, Howard. Have you always liked being Howard Rourke? And Rourke doesn't say anything, but he gets the look on this face where Winan just looks and says, oh, okay, you've answered.
Of course, Howard Rourke likes being Howard Rourke.
Yes. Howard Rourke loves being Howard Rourke, and he loves the earth. When he's asked, why did you want to be an architect? He says, because I love this earth. I love the things of the earth. And there were many things that I wanted to change. They weren't the way that I wanted them.
Right.
Howard Rourke loves life, loves this earth.
And he loves his values in other people.
Yes.
He loves Dominique. He loves Gil Winan. He loves Stephen Mallory. Look at what happened with Stephen Mallory and how his life was turned around. And he was ready to turn it around when he found Howard Rourke. Peter Keating was never ready to turn his life around. And sadly, he, turned into who he was at the end of the book. And
think about how much Howard Rourke offered him.
Yeah.
If Keating had been a better man.
Right.
What Rourke could have taught him, just by example, by the bits of help that he gave him with his work.
Yeah. Just by example. Just being a good example.
Yeah, that's that scene with the dean at the college, where the dean is saying, do you mean to tell me that you're thinking seriously of building that way when and if you are an architect? Yes. My dear fellow, who will let you? That's not the point. The point is, who will stop me?
Yes.
Of course, we get to find out who will stop him, because another one of my favorite things, it's got to be in Ayn Rand's greatest hits. There are people who claim that Ayn Rand's writing is flat or that her characters aren't very deep. Her characters are amazing. And if you want to see the depth of her characters, not just the heroes, but my gosh, the villains. Oh yeah, all of her villains, they're all like James Taggart. Oh my God, she has the greatest villains. In fact, it's funny because people will put up Ayn Rand quotes, memes around the internet. And a lot of times they'll pick an Ayn Rand quote, but it was actually said by one of her villains.
Yes.
But, you can't hold that too much against him, because she gave her villains some of the greatest. Ellsworth Toohey from The Fountainhead is some of the best lines. There's nothing as significant as a human face, nor as eloquent. We can never really know another person except by our first glance at him, because in that glance, we know everything, even though we're not always wise enough to unravel the knowledge. You have to realize this is a woman who believed in love at first sight. And if you are willing to take that advice and learn to use it, it is amazing how much you can tell about a person by the way that they approach you, not just by how open and enthusiastic they are, but by their posture, by where their eyes are, by whether they look at you when they talk to you, by what they do with their hands, by the way that they seem to be in the world and with, anyway. far wonder that a woman who saw that much in a person's visage could also believe in love at first sight. But here's a more common one. But there's always a purpose in nonsense. Don't bother to examine a folly. Ask yourself only what it accomplishes. Every system of ethics that preached sacrifice grew into a world power and ruled millions of men. Of course, you must dress it up. You must tell people that they'll achieve a superior kind of happiness by giving up everything that makes them happy. You don't have to be too clear about it. Use big, vague words: universal harmony, eternal spirit, divine purpose, nirvana, paradise, racial superiority, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And he goes on. Of course, people pull out that one line: don't bother to examine a folly. Ask yourself only what it accomplishes. I think too many people take that one out of context, because Ayn Rand never meant it the way a lot of people do, as a way to make fun of people. Ayn Rand examined follies. She was the best at examining follies. All she meant was sometimes evil is evil. Sometimes the explanation of why somebody chose to do the wrong thing is because they didn't choose to do the right thing. And, but again, great line: don't bother to examine a folly. Ask yourself only what it accomplishes. And that was given to one of her villains. So people will quote Ayn Rand with that line, but it really needs to be understood in context. You know, similarly, the line that people often think was a big dig, a big insult, a big ha 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 gotcha, but really wasn't, which is the scene in which Ellsworth Toohey finally meets Howard Rourke. And other than in the courtroom, I don't think there's anywhere else they actually meet. But they do meet at the site of Cordland Home. Was it Cordland? No, I'm sorry, the Temple of the Human Spirit, which was turned into the
Home for the
Hopkins Stoddard Home for Subnormal Children.
Yeah.
And Ellsworth Toohey walks up to Howard Rourke and says, "Mr. Rourke, we're alone here. Why don't you tell me what you think of me? In any words you wish. No one will hear us." And the only thing Howard Rourke says to him after that is, "But I don't think of you." And I think what a lot of people miss is it's not a dig, it's not an insult. It is an insult, obviously, but it was meant that way. It was literally true. And that's what makes it such a great dig, such a great insult. But that's not how Howard Rourke means it. Howard Rourke never fights Ellsworth Toohey, even when arguably he probably should.
Yep.
There's no room for Ellsworth Toohey in the life of a Howard Rourke. And that's one of the fundamental lessons that I get from Ayn Rand. We never had to take any of it seriously, did we?
Yes.
Now, I said you need a balance. You need to figure out how much time and energy you're going to put into fighting evil, and how much time and energy you're going to put into actually achieving values in your life: career success, financial success, romantic success, the passions that you carry. You know, I've made it 97-3. It's my 97-3 rule. 97% of your time should be spent focused on values. 3% of your time should be spent protecting yourself against disvalues. Buying insurance, or putting, locks or cameras on your house, or supporting organizations that are fighting for the things you believe in. But that is why my biggest, is it my biggest, maybe my second favorite greatest hit from Ayn Rand? In talking about the benevolent universe premise, we have the primacy of existence, the fact that existence comes first. The world is out there. Whatever exists, exists. What makes the universe a benevolent place isn't that the universe is out to do anything for us. It's just the fact that the universe is there and it is what it is. Existence comes first, the primacy of existence. But integrated with that, then, is reason as man's mean of knowing existence, and man's life as the standard of values. And in my mind, that comes out as the primacy of values. Mm-hmm. What matters in life is living your life. You're here to live a life. You've got to guard against disvalues. You've got to guard against the things that might kill you or make your life less of a value, but that's not what you're here for. You're here to live a life. Your life, we started out with, as an end in itself. And, that would be on my mixtape, that would be the first song and the last song is every sequence in Ayn Rand's writing. And they're once you start looking for them, they're all over the place. That reaffirms your life as an end in itself, not born in hoc, not born with an altruistic duty to people who have less than you. There's room for charity, there's room for all kinds of kindness, but you're not in debt. You're not in hoc. Your life is an end in itself. So before I go on, I want to take another look at the chat. What have we got going on there? Because there's some really good comments out there.
Yeah, Daniel talks about another funny scene in the Fountainhead during I believe the trial with regard to Howard Rourke and Cortland Holmes and the blowing up of it.
Yes.
Mike is nervous and cautious with Steve Mallory. That Mike is Sean Xavier Dunnigan, who is the construction worker that Rourke discovered when he was trying to wrap a particular kind of conduit around a beam or something. Anyway, so Sean Xavier Dunnigan, very gruff. They would go out and have beers after work. Yep. Really fun. But Mike is nervous and cautious with Steve because he was afraid he was going to shoot someone again. But
as I recall, Steve says to Mike, he says, "Don't worry, I'm not going to shoot anybody." And Mike says, "No, it's okay, but a guy can't get sick just because he oughta." Yeah, nauseated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And oh goodness, yeah. So Johnny in the chat, he says from Anthem,
yes,
it says, quote, "He observes the face of a God, the God sought by humans since the inception of the world, the God who will grant joy and peace and pride. This God, this one word, I."
Yes.
And very, very good stuff. Let me go ahead and dig into one of mine, if you don't mind there, Robert.
Please.
All right. So Ayn Rand's formulation and integration of the concepts love, virtue, value, spiritual values, and emotional and metaphysical fuel. I think those were extremely important to have a better understanding of how to articulate why you like somebody, and how to strengthen your friendships with people, even the ones who are not objectivists. That can actually help with that as well, and that can actually be kind of a bit of a incentive for people to start reading Ayn Rand, to see the kinds of formulations of love and romantic love that Ayn Rand had. Very, very different. It was sort of that kind of spiritual fuel, spiritual trade found in the one quote that we read earlier with regard to the greatest gift you can give another person is a sign of an achievement.
Yes. Well,
the greatest gift you can give to your loved one is the sight of your own achievement, of you being happy, of your own values, your own passion for life. That is a gift that you give to your loved ones, and vice versa. And it goes both ways. And it's a wonderful thing. I'm going to go ahead and read something. I believe this was in the 25th anniversary edition of the Fountainhead that Ayn Rand wrote the foreword to.
Yes.
This is with regard to her husband, Frank O'Connor. She said, "It would be impossible for me to discuss the Fountainhead or any part of its history without mentioning the man who made it possible for me to write it, Frank O'Connor. In a play I wrote in my early 30s, Ideal, the heroine, a screen star, speaks for me when she says, quote, I want to see real living and in the hours of my own days, that glory I create as an illusion. I want it real. I want to know that there is someone somewhere who wants it too, or else what is the use of seeing it and working and burning oneself for an impossible vision? A spirit too needs fuel. It can run dry, unquote. Frank was the fuel. He gave me in the hours of my own days the reality of that sense of life which created the Fountainhead. And he helped me to maintain it over a long span of years when there was nothing around us but a gray desert of people and events that evoked nothing but contempt and revulsion. The essence of the bond between us is the fact that neither of us has ever wanted or been tempted to settle for anything less than the world presented in the fountainhead. We never will. We never will. There you see spiritual values between two people and the kind of bond that's created from it. They were married 50 years, and I just want to mention a few things of values that they shared together. They had a cat named Frisco. I think they had a couple cats. And by the way, she was a subscriber of Cat Fancy. And one of her cats named was Frisco. And Frisco's official name was Professor of Epistemology.
Yes.
But she had a whole array of different values in her life, from stamp collecting to these little stuffed lion cubs they would bring out at Christmas time and decorate the tree with, called Oscar and Oswald. There were just so many things in their life that they did together. And a lot of if you want to read something very personal not from Ayn Rand, but from the people who knew her, read the book. I think it's 100 Voices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 100 people talking about Ayn Rand and what they thought of her, what their impression of her was. And it ranges from very personal to, business associates, but she was a very remarkable person, very memorable person. And if you want to get to know her as a person, that's a great place.
Yep. Well, that'll get to a point that I will mention at the very end. But before we get there, I have to say, when I mentioned the primacy of the individual, her answer to collectivism also applied. It was her answer to sexism and racism, and especially racism, which is relevant now in the age of anti-racism, which is a form of racism. She wrote presciently way back in the Objectivist newsletter and printed in The Virtue of Selfishness. She did an article called Racism. If you have any questions about racism or anti-racism or reactionary racism, so-called white power movement, she says, instead of fighting against racial discrimination, the anti-racists of the time, the late 60s, they are demanding that racial discrimination be legalized and enforced. Instead of fighting against racism, they are demanding the establishment of racial quotas. Instead of fighting for color blindness in social and economic issues, they are proclaiming that, tell me this doesn't sound like it was written in 2022. They are proclaiming that color blindness is evil and color should be made a primary consideration. Instead of fighting for equal rights, they are demanding special race privileges. The more things change, the more they stay the same. This from The Virtue of Selfishness. As we're running a little bit long here, I want to focus the remainder of my comments on takeaways. What should you take away from this conversation in addition to what we've already said? First of all, if you haven't already read it, you've got to get a copy of the book, Facets of Ayn Rand. Mm-hmm. The primacy of values comes to the fore in a event that Marianne Surrey, as the author, calls the where are my notes?
The glorious.
That was the word I was looking for. The glorious lunch break.
Lunch break.
They had a lunch, and they talked about an issue that Marianne Surrey had been wondering about. They had a circle of friends, there are different circles of friends in Objectivism way back when, including a group they called the Collective. And some of her friends were critical of Marianne Surrey because she had interests that were non-intellectual. An example of that was in her kitchen, she had a copper pot, a really nice one, and she kept it polished. She put a fair amount of time into making the kitchen very nice and keeping the pot very shiny. And she talked to Ayn Rand about it. Her friends had made her feel bad about it, and Ayn Rand asked her about it. They had a long conversation. It's outlined in the book, which, again, you absolutely should get and you should read. Long story short is Ayn Rand told her that even if you can't fully explain it philosophically, you should never, give up your values to that kind of pressure or that kind of feeling or those kind of folks. And it's kind of spawned a whole idea or group of people. We call ourselves copper pot objectivists. We do not sacrifice our values to the people who don't understand that Howard Rourke laughed and stood naked on a cliff at the beginning of the book. We're here to live a life. And you are always welcome. Anybody is welcome to come along and question my values. You can even attack my values if you want to, because I will defend them. Or maybe I'll just ignore your attacks. The point is, I'm not going to let that stop. You may convince me something I'm doing is wrong. I may drop a value once I figure out it's a hot potato. But you will never make me give away my copper pot or anything like it. That primacy of values that comes out in a story like Marianne Surrey's Glorious Lunch and copper pot objectivism. We'll never let that go. In that regard, incidentally, I heartily recommend in 2022, and there's a reason I mentioned the year, Ayn Rand's screenplays. Of course, she wrote the screenplay to The Fountainhead, a movie which had great strengths. It was actually very successful in the theaters, the movie version of The Fountainhead. I have a mixed reaction to it.
As do I.
Just because I love the book so much that the plot changes that had to be made in order to make it a movie kind of like, I want the way it was in the book. But of course, you can't do that in 2 hours.
I know, it's sort of common. I mean, I feel the same way about Harry Potter in the movies.
And the other thing is Gary Cooper was too old for that role.
Yeah, he was.
And as great an actor as he was, and he was a great actor, but as great as he was, he didn't really get the role.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help that, for example, during the college scenes, they didn't show his face. And it seems like that was a what's the word I'm looking for? Cinematic trick in order to achieve a certain effect. But the biggest reason they did that was he looked way too old to be in college. He was way too old for that role. And it was so common in Hollywood those days to have a 50-year-old actor with a 20-year-old love interest.
Yeah, Anne in the chat says that Cooper was too wooden.
Too wooden, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, again, Howard Rourke was, even though he was extremely relaxed and he never got riled up for social reasons, he was never a second-hander. He would get enthusiastic because a bunch of people were around. But he was an enormously passionate person, and that doesn't often come across in the film. Point is, screenplays, Ayn Rand also wrote a couple other screenplays. She did adaptations of properties for Hal Wallace. And one of them was a movie called You Came Along. And this is a charming film. It gets a little bit heavy toward the end, but it's got some of those Ayn Rand earmarks, qualities, things in it that make it worth watching. And given the research I've done, and I'm not a legal expert or a copyright expert, but I believe both this film and the other one released in 1945, Love Letters, they're now out of copyright, 75 years after the initial copyright. So they were out of copyright in 2020, which means you can track these down on eBay or anybody else who's willing to make you a copy of it. And it's all perfectly legal and quite fine. Which is good because they were getting hard to find. I've got a copy of Love Letters around here somewhere, but this one I had to order off of eBay.
Yes.
Between the two, I like Love Letters more.
Yeah, but they're both.
This one's a little more fun, but Love Letters is more passionate. So definitely watch both of them. Neither one of the original books on which they were based were Ayn Rand properties, but the revisions, the adaptations that she did changed everything, and they've got that Ayn Rand style. So absolutely worth watching, and these fit on my Ayn Rand mixtape as well. Among Ayn Rand's greatest hits, I Love You Came Along and Love Letters.
And thank you. Special thanks to Johnny in the chat who sends us $10. He says, great topic and discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that super chat. Very much appreciated.
Yay. Our first, maybe not our last super chat, perhaps.
Maybe not.
Hint, hint.
Either way, a generous one and very much appreciated. Any of your super chats, they all go toward the Ayn Rand Center UK, which is holding a conference in conjunction with ARI's Ayn Rand Con, the student conference in London. Earlier in the week, ARC UK is going to be having some of the events are kind of amazing. If you have any chance of coming with us to London,
yes,
you should be there. But either way, your super chats help support the events that they are throwing. So definitely do that. And if you're not already a member, go to AynRandCenter.co.uk and sign up for a membership. And you give them a little money or a lot of money every month, and you get in on things that you can't see publicly.
Right.
Communication boot camps, for example, with Don Watkins, or some of the study groups on the weekend that are exclusive Zoom meetings
with
that you
James
can only
Valiant.
get on with James Valiant.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So, Amy, what else have you got? Because I know you had more, and I just have some concluding remarks here.
I've got one more, and that is the distinction between the primacy of existence and primacy of consciousness, and how primacy of consciousness was my epiphany about. See, okay, I am who I am. I've always been, looking for ideas. I knew that ideas mattered. And I also was looking for the kind of view of life that was my own, and one where fairness mattered, where, values mattered. And, and unfortunately, I grew up in a bad situation around bad people. Not all bad, but a lot of them were just not.
It was a hard knock life.
Yeah. And so it was extremely important to me to understand the nature of evil, and to understand the nature of why is it that people lie and cheat and hurt and harm and abuse and enable and all that horrible stuff. And so that was, in terms of my own understanding about life and how I wanted to understand people and understand what their motivations were. For me, it really came down to the primacy of consciousness. That's where it all starts. It all starts when you throw reality out. You start, just dropping context, dropping the facts of things, and trying to manipulate other people into believing lies that you're telling them. And then in the process, of course, you're evading the fact that that's not going to work. You're evading the fact that honesty is practical. And the primacy of consciousness, very, very intriguing idea that I found a lot of value in. And I'm so grateful to Ayn Rand for doing all the things that she did, and coming up with a philosophy and organizing it, and coming up with new concepts and rewriting some concepts that were not quite right. She is so good.
In that regard, because Ayn Rand clarified so many concepts, it's interesting. It came up earlier today on TDO, the Daily Objective. This was a fun one. If you didn't catch it, go to YouTube and watch it afterward. And the topic for today's TDO, first of all, you have to know that on Thursday, they do the Thursday Collective. They have multiple hosts. We had, I think, 5 different hosts on today. It was great. And they were talking about a fun topic, the worst ways to spread objectivism, and gave examples of some of the, I guess nowadays you'd call them failure modes. But it was interesting that the topic of word definitions came up. And people will get hung up on word definitions. Some people will make the mistake of thinking they are Ayn Rand and can try to reclaim a word like selfish without defining it. And one thing that had to be acknowledged, and I've made this point before, is that even though Ayn Rand had very clear and specific definitions of words that were often revolutionary, her understanding, for example, of selfishness, she would use words using multiple definitions like quote unquote normal people. So for example, there are some people who, if you ever say, I wish it wouldn't rain this afternoon, and they'll say, no, you can't say wish. You're not allowed to use the word wish. You're an objectivist. That's a whim worshiper's word. And the fun thing is to go through Ayn Rand's writing and find examples of, for example, how she used the word selfish in the colloquial sense as well, when it was understood in that context what it meant. Or in this case, how she used the word wish. I love the scene in Atlas Shrugged where Reardon and Francisco are talking, and it's we have Reardon here. I wish, Reardon began and stopped abruptly. Francisco smiled. Afraid to wish, Mr. Reardon? I wish I could permit myself to like you as much as I do. I'd give. And Francisco stopped inexplicably. Reardon saw the look of an emotion he could not define, yet felt certain to be pain. He saw Francisco's first moment of hesitation. It's a very intense scene. It's one of those scenes I can't read without getting choked up reading it. But that's the last thing I'm going to put on my mixtape here. My Ayn Rand's greatest hits is the examples of loving friendships, these intense relationships, these friendships, the kind of friendship you have where you would do anything for somebody, you would risk your life for somebody. This woman who doesn't believe in self-sacrifice, and it's not, it's living up to your values. But think of the relationship between Francisco and Hank Reardon. If you don't get the intensity of that, go to the scene where Francisco's talking to Dagny and Hank Reardon shows up. And
with his own key to the
with his
apartment.
own key to the door. And this is when Francisco finds out that Dagny and Reardon are lovers. And I'm tempted to read that sequence, but I can't do it without getting choked up. It'll leave me a mess. But these loving friendships that Ayn Rand shows in her novels, and shows her, or the obvious one of Rourke and Wynand, Gil Wynand, the one man that Howard Rourke tried to compromise for. Because it was Wynand who said, love is the exception making. What did Ayn Rand mean by that? There's a whole episode that we'll do on that at some point. But these deep and loving friendships that have the intensity of a romantic relationship, even though they are just friendships. Magnificent. But that's the kind of passion you want in your life. And that would be my closing point. The takeaway point is, above and beyond, you should get a copy of Facets of Ayn Rand and read it. And you should get a copy of the early Ayn Rand and read it. And you should track down copies of Love Letters and You Came Along, and the screenplays and movies that Ayn Rand wrote, and watch those. Mm-hmm. But that primacy of values, that lust for life, that passion, that is what more than anything else, is the theme of my Ayn Rand's greatest hits, of my Ayn Rand mixtape. And what I hope you find yourself getting out of this philosophy, a philosophy for living on earth. If philosophy is the instruction manual of life, and somebody finally came along and got it right, and I hope you're really capitalizing on that, because even above and beyond Ayn Rand's greatest hits, the values are just endless.
They are. Honestly, okay, so before the pandemic, we hosted the Great Lakes Subjectivists in our wonderful living room, and I served dinner and all that stuff. We get people together and we would talk until 5 a.m. I mean, we would start at 5:30 p.m. in the afternoon and go into 5 a.m. and it was hard to stop sometimes, because the ideas are endless.
It's fun because there are people who will say Ayn Rand changed my life, The Fountainhead changed my life, Atlas Shrugged changed my life, and there's a lot of other people who say, oh yeah, Ayn Rand didn't really change anything for me. She kind of gave me some words for stuff I already believed. And I always want to tell those people, then you didn't get it. There's no way, I don't care how great a rational capitalist with a passion for romantic art you were. If Ayn Rand didn't change your life, consider rereading her stuff, because there's something in there you missed. I get it. Some people really were already pretty damn sharp. But I'm not one of those people. Ayn Rand absolutely changed my life. And for all the reasons that I've talked about and mentioned, and I hope that y'all got a lot of that too.
Yes.
Thank you for the notes in the chat. It is interesting that, there's a few more in there I probably should have read, and we'll go back and read them all afterwards. But what we're going to do now, we're going to wrap and go over to Clubhouse. And then you can talk back to us. If you have access to the Clubhouse platform, come over to Clubhouse, talk back. We'll do an after show. We'll have some fun with that. because I want to hear in words what you've been saying in the chat. You can do that. Yeah, Johnny says Ayn Rand was an absolute life changer for me. It's funny that our gang, the kind of crowd who would listen to this show and be on the chat, you wonderful people. We get a lot of that. And I love that because, again, when we go out and do other events with other objectivist groups, I get a little more of the, oh, yeah, didn't really change my life, but yeah, she's all right. Like, man, what are you reading? So yes, absolutely glad to hear that. And Johnny says Iggy Pop's Lust for Life plays on the outro. I really should have had that ready. I really should have had that. I've been using, the music I do is all music that I produce, so I don't run into copyright claims, but it's YouTube. They handle all of that and throw 3 cents at Iggy Pop anyway. So it's all handled. And Christopher says, I like The Boy on the Hill Who Sees Rourke. Yes. Opening, part 4, chapter 1. Magnificent. And yes, he hoped that he would not have to die.
Yeah. And Anne, also before that, she gives us the wonderful words, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Which is absolutely true. It's the Beatles. Hard to beat that. And yes, it is a call for the benevolent universe and the fact that justice is a thing. So absolutely true. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's go over to Clubhouse. Come talk to us. We're glad you were here. We'll do this again next Thursday. And goodbye.